The trial went on without him and he was convicted. Today he was sentenced to 24 years in prison, and the judge ordered his mouth taped shut in court.
As we all know that some criminals don't care about what happens as a result of their actions, but what happens when the consequences of their bad decisions catch up with them. Today, we will explore the internal workings of the justice system, where some of the most dangerous criminals confront their lifelong destinies, and their reactions will shock you. Come along with us on this exciting adventure as we bring you 15 dangerous convicts and how they reacted to their sentences. Are they truly remorseful? Or do you think their sentences were unfair? We'll leave you to be the judge. Number 15, TJ Lane. Back in 2012, something terrible occurred at a high school. A 17-year-old student named TJ Lane caused great harm by shooting 6 children. Sadly, 3 young lives were lost forever. Reports suggested that the shooter had a disagreement with one of the victims. TJ used a type of handgun called a .22 caliber, which unfortunately his victims also possessed. 2 of the injured students were rushed to the hospital, with one of them suffering grave injuries that left them unable to move their bodies. The authorities took action and charged Lane with 3 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of assault. But due to TJ's age, he was held in a special center for young offenders while they considered whether he should face trial as an adult. This tragic incident unfolded as TJ awaited a bus that would take him to alternative school, where he was supposed to attend classes. The 3 teenagers who lost their lives in this heart-wrenching shooting were Danny Patmerton, Russell King Jr., and Demetrius Hewlin. Some people thought that TJ lost control and couldn't handle the situation. However, the prosecutor in his case called him a disgusting human being for his actions. When TJ appeared in court for his charges, he wore a blue shirt, but later revealed a white t-shirt with the word killer written on it. Everyone was left lost for words by his shockingly odd behavior. In March 2013, Lane pleaded guilty to all his crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for 3 counts, with no possibility of parole. Number 14, Trey Relford. In 2015, a sad incident occurred in Lexington, Kentucky, leaving the local Muslim community in deep sorrow. It was a day that ended in tragedy for Salahuddin, a young man who worked as a pizza delivery person. The whole incident deeply affected the community because Salahuddin's father, who held a highly respected position as the principal of a local Islamic academy, was well known and admired by many. A terrible thing occurred while Salahuddin was out delivering pizzas on that fateful day. He was attacked and robbed by a person named Trey Alexander Relford and his companions. The incident shook the community to its core. It was later revealed that Relford had committed a hate crime. As a consequence of his actions, Relford was found guilty and handed a sentence of 31 years in prison. Salahuddin had dreams and aspirations of becoming a filmmaker, but tragically, his life was cut short. However, despite facing such an immense tragedy, Salahuddin's father, Dr. Abdul Munim Sombat Jitmood, displayed extraordinary compassion during the court proceedings. It was a moment filled with deep emotion and genuine sincerity when he decided to offer forgiveness to Relford on behalf of his son and himself. Dr. Jitmood explained that forgiveness is highly valued in Islam, representing a significant act of kindness and charity. The scene of forgiveness and reconciliation between Dr. Jitmood and Relford was incredibly moving. Tears flowed down their faces as they embraced one another, symbolizing the incredible power of forgiveness and Relford's genuine remorse. This touching display of compassion touched the hearts of many people who witnessed it locally and online. News of this remarkable act of forgiveness spread far and wide, gaining admiration and respect from individuals all around the world. Number 13, Cameron Herron. Cameron, who was only 18 years old, caused a terrible accident to occur back in 2018. The incident took place on Bayshore Boulevard and had devastating consequences, resulting in the loss of his mother and young daughter. It was reported that Cameron was accompanied by a friend who was driving a Nissan Altima on that fateful day in May. Meanwhile, Cameron himself was behind the wheel of a black Ford Mustang, a car he had received as a graduation gift. On that morning, Jessica Reisinger Robinault, a woman originally from Ohio but visiting her relatives in Tampa, decided to take a walk. She pushed her 21-month-old daughter Lelia in a stroller as they crossed the road near Knights Avenue. It was during this innocent activity that tragedy struck. Both Cameron and his friend acknowledged their responsibility for causing the accident, leaving it up to the judge to determine their sentences. Cameron deeply regretted what he did and understood how serious it was. The state's rules said the least punishment for his crime was 18 years, but it could go up to 30 years. Cameron's lawyer tried to argue for a lower sentence, but the judge gave him 24 years in the end. He got 9 years for causing his mom's death and 15 more for his young daughter's death. Cameron looked shocked and scared when the judge said the decision, but a mask partly covered his face. His mom hugged him tightly and cried before the police took him away. Even after he appealed, a group of 3 judges agreed with the sentence. They wanted to use Cameron's case as a warning to stop other careless drivers from causing the same kind of tragedy. Number 12. Danta Wright. This is one of the scariest reactions ever seen from someone who has been found guilty. Danta Wright, who was only 17 years old at the time, committed a horrific murder of an 18-year-old teenager named Jordan Klee from Ann Arbor. Jordan, a student at Pioneer High School, should have been attending classes, but instead, he was tragically discovered shot dead on October 2016. A Pine Lake Village Apartments maintenance worker found his lifeless body not far from his home. Jordan was a senior in high school, a diligent student, and had a passion for playing football. Danta Wright was the accused murderer and was scheduled to have a pre-trial hearing. However, he surprised everyone by confessing to the crime. During the legal proceedings, he displayed absolutely no signs of remorse. In fact, he appeared in court with a disturbing smile on his face every time. When Jordan's grieving family read their heart-wrenching statement about their beloved son, Danta's actions were pure malevolence. He sat there, smiling, and even had the audacity to laugh at times. The judge was utterly disgusted by his behavior and questioned whether the agreed-upon sentence was too lenient. Considering his appalling actions, it would have been reasonable to immediately proceed to trial and sentence him to life imprisonment. However, on July 2017, Danta was ultimately given a sentence of 25 to 52 years in prison. Although justice was served to some extent, the sinister and unremorseful demeanor displayed by Danta throughout the proceedings left a lasting impression on all those involved. Number 11. Diana Lovejoy. Divorce is a really tough situation for any couple, no matter the circumstances. It doesn't matter if they are parting ways amicably or if one person is completely against it. Sometimes, money becomes a big issue that needs to be settled, and unfortunately, children often get caught in the middle. It's a difficult and emotional time, but one must wonder, is it ever worth attempting to end your partner's life? In the case of Diana Lovejoy, it seems she believed it was. She was recently found guilty of her involvement in a failed murder-for-hire plot against her husband. When the verdict was announced in court, the people present were shocked beyond belief. Diana collapsed and fainted right there in the courtroom. Her accomplice, Walden K. McDavid, was also found guilty of conspiring to commit murder. The judge had to clear the courtroom so that Diana could receive immediate medical attention. They carried her out on a stretcher, and a paramedic remarked that she appeared to be in a state of complete shock. It's difficult to place the blame entirely on her, especially considering the severe consequences she was facing. The guilty verdict meant she would be sentenced to spend a minimum of 25 years to life in prison. Meanwhile, the person who actually pulled the trigger, her firearms instructor Weldon McDavid Jr., could potentially be sentenced to an even longer prison term of 50 years to life. But why did Diana hire someone to kill her husband in the first place? According to a female juror, Diana didn't want to share custody of their son or pay him $120,000 in the divorce settlement. The situation overwhelmed her, leading to desperate measures. But violence is never the answer. Resolving conflicts legally is always the better option. Number 10. Jordan. Fuss. Drinking and driving is a very wrong and dangerous thing to do. It's never a good idea, not even in an emergency. The story of Jordan Fuss, a 22-year-old from Davie, proves that. He was driving under the influence of alcohol and caused a terrible car accident. He had been drinking rum and decided to drive his 2004 Infiniti G35 with a passenger. It turns out the passenger gave him the drink, but later it was discovered that marijuana was also found in his system. This happened just before midnight in the early autumn of 2014. Fuss was driving his car very fast, over 90 miles per hour, when he crashed into another car at the intersection of Davie and Sterling Road. Witnesses reported to the police that Fuss's car was swerving between lanes before the crash. They described it as a loud noise followed by Fuss's car flying and hitting another car coming from the opposite direction. The crash affected someone at the store. 2 young men left the car and didn't slow down as they neared the intersection. Nancy Saavedra, her 14-year-old daughter, and her 6-year-old son were in the car that was hit. Nancy and her daughter survived, but little Santiago Mondragon, who was in the back seat, was declared dead at the scene. Fuss was charged with reckless driving, vehicular homicide, and DUI manslaughter. His blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. In court in 2017, Fuss appeared visibly scared, shaking uncontrollably, and on the verge of tears. His lawyer tried to prevent him from going to prison by emphasizing his deep regret, but the judge sentenced him to 14 years in jail. Fuss cried throughout the proceedings, but no remorse could bring back the lost son or ease Nancy and her family's pain. Number 9. Franklin Williams. Franklin. One of the individuals involved was a person who didn't understand the importance of staying quiet and allowing the grown-ups to speak. However, the judge in charge of the trial in Cleveland knew how to handle a criminal like Franklin Williams. The judge tried their best to keep the proceedings running smoothly, but Williams had different intentions. He simply couldn't stop talking, even after the judge warned him numerous times. As a result, the judge grew frustrated with Williams's arrogant behavior and had to resort to an unusual measure. The judge decided to order the deputies to place a piece of red tape over Franklin's mouth to prevent him from interrupting the court any further. Williams was visibly displeased with this method of silencing and began shouting phrases like freedom of speech, duct tape, and hashtag as the deputies escorted him out of the courtroom. The media strongly criticized Williams's reaction, considering the judge's order to be inhumane. The situation escalated to the point where the judge felt compelled to apologize for their questionable method of silencing and removed themselves from the case. Eventually, Williams was found guilty of 3 armed robberies connected to the duct tape incident. He insisted, "I am not an animal, despite what people may believe. I am a man." Unfortunately for him, the judge who had taped his mouth handed down a shorter prison sentence compared to the subsequent judge. Consequently, Williams is presently serving a 33-year term in prison. Number 8. Dexter Johnson. Dexter Johnson, a man with a dark past, was accused of committing some of the most heinous crimes. He was sentenced to death after being involved in the murders of 2 individuals, Maria Apparecci and We Know, on behalf of Harris County. Dexter and 4 of his teenage accomplices carjacked and robbed Maria before taking her and We Know to a secluded location. At the spot, they heinously committed murder, and Dexter raped Maria in the process. The horrific deeds of Dexter and his partners in crime did not end there. During their crime spree for 25 days, they committed several robberies that led to the murder of 5 other victims. During his trial, Dexter showed little to no emotion and had a stone-faced expression on his face. However, when Dexter was sentenced, he looked up, pressed his lips together, and his eyes filled with tears. The sight of his family members during the sentence pushed him to the edge, and he threw a chair in the courtroom. The officers on duty immediately tackled him to restore the order of the court. The commotion caused Dexter's relatives to collapse, while others sobbed for their family members' mitigation of his punishment. District Judge Denise Collins, witnessing the trial, felt the need to comfort Maria Apparecci's parents, who had suffered greatly due to Dexter. She checked on their well-being and embraced Maria's mother. Initially set for execution in 2019, Dexter's punishment was postponed when a federal judge intervened, and he obtained new legal representation. Dexter's harmful actions caused immense anguish to innocent victims' families. The tragic incident still affects the community and its surroundings. Finally, justice was served with the court's verdict. Number 7. Roxana Sikorsky. When she was only 15 years old, in October 2014, something terrible happened. She woke up suddenly in the middle of the night and attacked her brother. It was a horrifying moment for her family. She didn't stop there. She also tried to harm her parents and her other siblings. However, thankfully, she failed to hurt them. Her name is Roxana, and she was just 17 years old when she received a severe punishment at 2016. The court sentenced her to spend 10 to 20 years in prison. Before the sentence was given, Roxana's mother made a heartfelt plea to the court. She begged them to show mercy and explained that her adopted daughter desperately needed ongoing psychological help. Roxana's mother revealed that she was still fragile and delicate, and being placed in an adult prison would devastate her. Roxana had been adopted by the Sikorskis from Poland when she was only 4 years old. The family took her in with her 2 siblings because she suffered from abuse during her early childhood. Roxana had a mental illness called reactive attachment disorder. This made it hard for her to connect with her caregivers. In court, she seemed truly sorry for the pain she caused. The sad teenager apologized to her parents for not meeting their expectations and promised to improve herself no matter what. Eventually, Roxana agreed to a plea deal. She admitted guilt for trying to murder someone, and the court dropped 6 other serious charges. Her boyfriend, who influenced her, got a life sentence for 7 convictions. Roxana's future is unsure. She'll spend much of her youth in jail, hoping to heal and rebuild her life when she's released. Number 6. Ricky Hand. When criminals receive punishment in court, they often react by raising their hands or throwing things like chairs or podiums. This is not an uncommon sight. However, back in 2016, something quite remarkable occurred in a courtroom in Springfield, Ohio. It involved a man named Ricky Hand, who was 46 years old at the time and had committed numerous armed robberies. Ricky had already been involved in about 30 robberies and was on parole when he committed yet another crime. Ricky's fate was sealed when he learned that he would be sentenced to a daunting 40 years behind bars. Understandably, this news did not sit well with him. In a state of disbelief, he repeatedly questioned the judge. "Did you really just give me 40 years, sir?" But what happened next took everyone by surprise. In a surprising turn, Ricky reached under his arm and pulled out something unexpected. This shocked everyone in the courtroom as he threw feces and urine around. It seemed like Ricky was prepared for a bad outcome and wanted to make a big exit, leaving everyone amazed. Quickly, court officials subdued Ricky and regained control. Later, the sheriff's office investigated how this incident could have happened, as searches were supposed to be done before entering the courtroom. Sadly, it was clear that security measures were ignored in this case. This incident reminds us how important it is to have strict security rules in courtrooms. It shows the need for thorough searches to stop people from bringing harmful or disruptive things into legal proceedings. After Ricky's surprising act, authorities realized they must review and strengthen their security measures for future court proceedings. Now, it's time for today's subscriber pick. Just when you think you've seen everything, wait until you witness this bizarre scene. This footage captures the moment in the courtroom when a peculiar criminal waits for his sentencing. However, this individual doesn't look like an ordinary criminal at all. He might have been involved in daring and notorious activities that have made him infamous. That's precisely why he is closely accompanied by armed guards, as if they expect him to cause chaos in the courtroom at any moment. His mere presence sparks curiosity and amazement. Who could he be? What crime could he have committed? Have you ever seen any convicts that you think should be part of our video? Let us know your answers in the comment section. Number 5. Michelle Blair. Michelle Blair lived in Detroit with her 4 children, but she had a hard time finding and keeping a job. It was a constant struggle for her. People repeatedly advised her to find work and return to school, but she ignored their suggestions. Instead of looking for employment, she remained unemployed. Sadly, this decision led to her being forced out of her home because she couldn't pay the rent. On March 24, 2015, she received a notice of eviction, and soon after a crew arrived to take away her furniture. However, when they entered her house, they stumbled upon something shocking. Two of her children, Stephen Gage Barry and Stoney and Blair, were nowhere to be found. The crew immediately contacted the police, who started a frantic search for the missing children. To everyone's horror, the police eventually found the bodies of the two children in a freezer inside Michelle Blair's apartment. The discovery was devastating. Michelle Blair was arrested immediately due to overwhelming evidence. Her children's frozen bodies revealed horrifying abuse, including beatings, burns, and murder. This revelation was chilling and heartbreaking. During the trial, Blair admitted to the unspeakable acts, claiming she did it to protect her youngest son from abuse. However, there was no evidence supporting her claim. The prosecutor argued that no signs of abuse were found, but Blair stubbornly denied it. She lived in her own distorted reality. Blair received a life sentence without parole, a just punishment for her terrible crimes. What shocked everyone was Blair's lack of remorse. Throughout the trial, she showed no emotion, refusing to accept responsibility. She even justified her actions, saying she would repeat them without regret. Blair's words stunned everyone, revealing her detachment from the seriousness of her crimes. Number 4. Antonio Barbeau. Antonio Barbeau was only 14 years old when, with the help of a friend, he attacked his grandmother and took her life. He used a hatchet to harm the 78-year-old woman. Barbeau and his friend, Nathan Papp, were found guilty by the court of causing the death of Barbara Olson in her home in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. The unsuspecting elderly lady had invited her grandson and his friend inside her home. As she turned her back to call Antonio's mother, he struck her on the head with the hatchet. Afterward, he felt sick and ran to the bathroom. When he came out, he saw Pappy hitting the woman with a hammer. Barbeau was sentenced to a minimum of 36 years in jail in 2013. He will be eligible for parole when he turns 50 years old. Antonio attempted to read a statement of apology in court, but he couldn't hold back his tears and began crying. He handed the statement to his attorney, who also struggled to hold back tears while reading it. The judge said the punishment was not too harsh, given how awful the crime was. The court knew Barbeau had a brain injury from an accident in 2009, which caused a cognitive disorder that affected his decision to commit the crime. But his mental condition doesn't excuse the terrible nature of the crime. Antonio's friend, Pappy, claimed that Antonio came up with the idea to rob and attack. When they realized Olson was dead, they got scared and tried to take her to the car, leaving a trail of blood in the house. But they couldn't put her in the car, so they left her in the garage. Then they supposedly stole things like a purse, money, and jewelry before running away in Olson's car. Number 3. Nicholas Cruz. Nicholas Cruz, a teenager who carried a gun into a school in Parkland, caused a terrible tragedy that resulted in the deaths of 17 people. This devastating incident shook the community to its core. The court proceedings that followed were filled with sorrow and disappointment for the families of the victims. Despite their hopes for justice, a jury could not unanimously decide whether Cruz should receive the death penalty. As a result, he was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This outcome left the families feeling even more distraught, as they believed that Cruz deserved the harshest punishment for his heinous actions. The responsibility of delivering the required sentence fell upon Broward's Circuit Judge Elizabeth Shearer. She declared that Cruz must serve a lifetime behind bars for each of the 17 counts he had pleaded guilty to. In addition, she imposed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years for 14 counts, while the remaining 3 carried a sentence of life without parole. The judge made sure Cruz wouldn't make money from his crimes. She took money from his prison account until all costs were paid. This stopped Cruz from profiting from the pain he caused. After the trial, which lasted many months, Cruz was sent to the Florida Department of Corrections. The trial was very emotional, with 2 days of heartbreaking stories from survivors and victims' families. Cruz didn't show much emotion during the trial. He wore a red prison jumpsuit, glasses, and a mask. But when a victim's mother confronted him about his lack of emotion, he briefly removed his mask and showed his face. Number 2. Anthony Rodriguez. Anthony Rodriguez, a newly turned 18-year-old, found himself in a troubling situation due to his involvement in potentially violent offenses while under probation. In March 2012, he carried out a series of horrifying acts that would leave a lasting impact. This unsettling incident took place at Martin Luther King Jr. Park in Bakersfield. In a reprehensible act, Anthony robbed, kidnapped, and assaulted a deaf woman. Several months later, crucial DNA evidence came to light, connecting him to this heinous crime. Consequently, the verdict was delivered in August of that same year, declaring him guilty. The statement of facts presented during the trial depicted a distressing sequence of events. A woman was walking in the park when a strange man came up to her. He threw her to the ground and took her backpack. She desperately tried to get her mother's laptop from the bag, but the man forcefully grabbed her shirt and dragged her towards a restroom. She kept saying no, but he didn't listen. After what felt like a very long time, the man left, taking the backpack with him. Anthony didn't say anything during the trial to defend his awful actions, but on the last day, when they gave him a sentence of 30 years to life, he unexpectedly exploded with anger. He shouted a lot of bad words and said the punishment was unfair. The authorities quickly subdued him and took him out of the courtroom. After the trial, Anthony's family shared their deep concern. They thought the punishment was too harsh. Anthony's mother was overwhelmed with sadness and asked if something had gone wrong. She couldn't help but believe that her son didn't deserve to spend 30 years in prison. Number 1. Tatiana Fusari. This is the story of Tatiana Fusari and her husband Seth Welch. They were given a life sentence for taking the life of their 10-month-old baby Mary Welch. The couple lived in Kent County, Michigan, when they committed this terrible crime. Mary Welch was a sweet little baby who died in August 2018 from not getting enough food and water. Her parents, driven by their religious beliefs and distrust of the medical system and government, refused to seek medical help, despite knowing that their baby's health was deteriorating. Mary's death could have been prevented if they had taken her to a doctor. Tatiana Fusari admitted to noticing her baby's poor health, but still didn't take her to the hospital. This wasn't the first time they neglected their children's medical needs due to their strong religious beliefs. It was a clear case of serious parental neglect. Mary's weight dropped to only 8 pounds before she passed away. The autopsy showed that she died from chronic malnutrition, which could only happen if she was neglected and deprived of food and water. Further investigation revealed that their home was dirty and infested with mold, vermin, and insects. It was not a suitable environment for a family, let alone a child. Tatiana Fusari later claimed that her husband abused her and prevented her from taking the baby to the hospital, but this claim didn't excuse her actions with her daughter. During the trial, the judge sentenced her to life imprisonment for causing serious harm to a child, which is a felony. The couple also received an additional 15 to 30 years for the charge of first-degree child abuse. Watch her reaction to this news as she realizes the consequences of her actions and the life she will spend in prison. It serves her right. Did any of these things occur near your location? Or do you know about any other really surprising incidents like these? Let's have your answers in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.